So I'm going to start with the first problem on the quiz. There are several different ways I've seen students solve this, um, but I think the one that I'm going to start off with, I'm going to add 1/2 to both sides. It makes this left-hand side a little bit simpler. Oops. There we go. So what's convenient about this is that these two add to 0, so that takes care of that. And then these have a common denominator, so it makes it pretty easy to add those together. So now I'm going to, those add to 0, so that's gone, and then I'm going to rewrite this as 6/2. So now 6/2 I can just replace with 3. So now there's a few different things I've seen students do, but you can do this all in one step, which is kind of a nice, you can multiply both sides by 3/4 if you want, and it comes out nicely, but just to be really clear, I'm going to show another way. So you could do 3 times 4/3, and then if I do 3 times 4/3, then I have to do 3 times 3. So what happens here, when I do 3 times 4m over 3, the 3 divides by 3 and you get 1. So over here, we're just left with 4m, and over here, we have 9, and then the last step, I think most everybody's familiar with. You divide both sides by 4. Oh my gosh, what just happened? And then, no surprise, after dividing by both sides by 4, you're left with 9/4. So that's the first one. So now let's move on to the second equation. So most everyone when doing the quiz did really well with this first part on the left-hand side. So when you distribute the 6, you would rewrite this as 18y and then minus 24. So now this part right here can give some students trouble. So how do you handle this subtraction, and what's actually being subtracted? Well, this whole thing is being subtracted. So some students make the mistake and only subtract 10y, but you have to subtract 10y and then you have to subtract this. So then you have a subtract and then another subtract. So you can think of this as plus -5. So now if I'm subtracting 10y and I'm subtracting -5, I can rewrite this as minus 10y plus 5. So because I'm subtracting this and then I'm subtracting this term too, so then it becomes plus 5. So let's clean up things on the right. And the 7 plus 5 makes 12. And now in the next step, I'm going to add 10 to both sides. Add 10y, excuse me. So when I add 10y, this becomes 28y, and if I add 10y, this becomes 0. And now I will add 24 to both sides. So if I add 24 to this side, I lose that. And if I add 24 to this side, so then I have simplified 28y equals 36. And when I divide both sides by 28, this becomes 1y and this becomes 36. divided by 28. And we can change that to an equivalent fraction by dividing both the numerator and denominator by 4, and we end up with 9/7. So let's move on to number 3. This one has been giving students problems, and the notation on here is really important that you have the notation. So when we're trying to find h of -2, that means our input's -2. So you want to write out this completely, h of -2, and then everywhere you see x, you put parentheses. So where x was, now I have parentheses. So there was a negative, or the opposite of quantity x squared. So where there was an x here, now I have a set of parentheses. So in place, I put -2, and then again here was another x, so I put -2. We can clean this up. So how do we handle this term? So this can be problematic for students. So what this means is the opposite of -2 quantity squared. Well, what is -2 quantity squared? It's just -2 times -2. So this is the opposite of this product. And let's go ahead and replace this with a -6. And -2 times -2, let's replace that with 4. So then I get h of -2 equals -10. So when the input's -2, the output's -10. So this question asks, is the relation a function? So you can quickly see using the vertical line test that it's not a function, but the next statement said justify your answer using the definition of function. So if you don't have that definition memorized yet, that's something you might want to work on. So I would say this is not a function. And all I have to do is give one input that has 2 outputs, because the input 1 has 2 different outputs, namely 1 and -1. The definition of function means that every input has exactly 1 output. So since the input 1 is having 2 outputs, we defy the definition of function, and so the relation is not a function. So next I want to give the domain and range. So the domain are all of the inputs that I can put into the function. So I can input 1 and I get out 1. Sorry, this is a relation. Or I could input 1 and get out a -1. Or I could input 5 and get some kind of output, maybe like 2.2 and -2.2, somewhere around there. However, I can't input -1 or -1.5 or -0.5. There are no outputs there. So my domain is my leftmost input, so that's 0. And I use the square bracket because I want to include 0. And then we assume this keeps going in this direction, on and on and on. So since it does, we write infinity. And then I use rounded parentheses. So there's the domain, from 0 to infinity, all positive numbers, including 0 if we wanted to use a verbal description. And the range, so the range is the lowest to highest, so all the output values. So if you think about this going down slowly, 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 forever, 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 it keeps going down. And same thing, keeps going up slowly, but it just keeps going up a little bit more every time. So the range, the leftmost, well, there is no leftmost, so we write negative infinity to positive infinity. That's using interval notation. If it weren't interval notation, I could just write all real numbers. So number 6, I really want to take some time to go over. So this says the percentage of smokers among adults age 18 and over is modeled by the equation k of x equals negative 0.44x plus 23.11, where x is the number of years after 2000. Find all x rounded to the nearest whole number such that k of x is equal to 19 and interpret. So input variable, so a variable is a letter that we use, and the input is the input quantity. It's inside the parentheses. So my input variable, what I would write here is x is equal to, and then what quantity is representing? Well, it says right here, x is the number of years after 2000. So I would write the number of years after 2000. So you're going to get problems like this the rest of the semester and probably the rest of the math that you take. So it's really good idea to take time to really understand what is the input quantity and what are we talking about before you start getting into solving. So the output variable is k of x. And this is equal to, what does it represent? Well, it says the percentage of smokers among adults age 18 and over. So what we put in a number of years after 2000, and what we get out is the percentage of smokers among adults age 18 and over. So now, a lot of students made a mistake in thinking that x was 19, but that's not what this says. This says k of x is 19. That means the output is 19. So when I substitute in, I want to substitute in for k of x, not for x, because I was given the output, and we're going to find out information about the input. So if k of x is equal to the percentage of smokers among adults age 18 and over, we know the percentage is 19%. We're just trying to figure out what year did this happen. So we start with this equation, and then to solve this, we subtract 23.11 from both sides. And we get negative 4.11 is equal to negative 0.44x. And then we divide both sides by negative 0.44. And we end up with x equals, or x is approximately 9.341. It says find all x rounded to the nearest whole number. So it's about 9. And then our conclusion, we're just making a statement about the input and the output. So we'll say, so if x is 9, x is the number of years after 2000. So, well, that means we're talking about 2009. So in 2009, since x is 9 and x is the number of years after 2000, what can we say about our output? The percentage of smokers among age 18 over. Well, oh, look, it's 19. That's what we are given. The percentage, well, maybe we wouldn't say the percentage. 19% of adults age 18 and over were smokers. So that's all, basically a statement. We wouldn't say 9 years after 2000 because that's just not how we speak. We would say in 2009, 19% of adults age 18 over were smokers. So that concludes the quiz. Let me know if you have any questions.